Friends, and welcome to another episode of the Making Spaces podcast, a podcast about making space for both yourself and others, both literally and figuratively. You can tell I'm a little excited. My name is Sarah, and this is one of my co-hosts who is...
Well, the only other co-host, Josie.
But we have two friends, incredible people who are working together with us on our podcasting group, which has been really fun. And so this is one of our latest editions, which is the Activistheology Project. And so two people that we have on today are Anna, who is a United Methodist pastor, co-host of the Activistheology Podcast, and also I just gotta say, someone who I've known through Wild Goose for a while, human who thrives on curating creative, spiritual, and entrepreneurial possibility. I own t-shirts that she makes, so it's so fun to have her on, as well as another good friend of the podcast and just personally, Dr. Robyn. And I like to say Dr. Robyn because I feel like it's important that people know that this human has they got all the credentials: trans, queer activist, Latinx scholar, public theologian, all-around great person, knows how to choose a bottle of wine. It is so fun to have both Anna and Robyn on. And so I'm a little bit bubbly just because it's so fun to see these people. I'm in Oregon, and so I haven't gotten to see Josie in person. So this feels like a COVID moment where I haven't seen some of my favorite people, and now you're all in the room and we're recording this. It's great. It's fine. Let me ask this question for both of you. What's one of your favorite spaces and why? And you can take that literally, figuratively, however you want to, and whoever wants to hop in can hop in.
Anna, yours is going to be much more interesting than mine.
My favorite space. Hi, everyone. Hi, Making Spaces podcast listeners. I'm so excited to be with both of you, Sarah and Josie. Really, thank you so much for having us. Okay, the answer to the question. One of my favorite spaces is in the middle of a crowd of humans who are enjoying and vibing and dancing and singing to live music. I am a live music junkie. I find so much joy in listening to creative humans sing and play, whether it's their own work or the work of others. And I literally suck energy into the marrow of my bones from other people while I'm standing in the middle of a crowd, vibing, dancing, singing along to live music. One of my favorite places to be is a floating music festival that I've been going on for the last 10 years. And if you can just imagine being in the middle of the Caribbean under the stars on a pool deck with 2,000 of your closest friends, like dancing and singing to live music in the middle of the ocean. So yeah, that's one of my favorite spaces, and that's why it's my favorite.
Oh my gosh, Anna, that's so good. All right, Dr. Robyn, follow that up.
Yeah, so now for something completely different.
Says the introvert.
I'm a hermit. In my former life, I think I was a Buddhist monk, and have sort of continued the religion train in becoming a theologian. So my favorite space would be in the woods, in a cabin, by myself, alone, in a room with a window and a book, peering out the window, perhaps with a cup of coffee or cold brew if it's hot. But I have been on one of those floating music festivals with Anna. I did go with Anna, and it was hilarious because I would go to bed at 9 o'clock and get up at 8 a.m. and go have breakfast. And Anna would come in at like 3 or 4 in the morning, and she would get up at around noon while I was having my first beer. So she'd be having breakfast at noon.
It's a true story. It's a true story.
And I'd be drinking my beer while she's having coffee. So I can go both. I can go lots of different ways, but my favorite space is like in a cabin alone with a book and a window.
I'm on your side, Dr. Robyn.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's so fascinating. So when I developed this question in the first season of Making Spaces, I realized how much the spaces that we love tell a lot about who we are, right?
Yeah, so absolutely.
Whether people use like Enneagram or they use Myers-Briggs or whatever it is, right? Like it only tells us like a sliver of who someone is. But I now know, like when we're hanging out, what environments either one of you would be excited about, and either one of you would be like, we good. I don't need that.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Put me in a cabin by myself with a window and a book, and I'm going to hitchhike to town.
And Josie and Dr. Roberts is not even going to, they're just like, how long have I been here? I don't even know.
Right. I'm going to get lost in this space. That's what I'm going to do.
Oof.
But I will say, Sarah, when we went to Tooth and Nail and we sat in that beautiful space and drank that amazing wine. And remember Sam, who helped us out?
Sam was amazing. Like, she became our best friend. It was so good.
Yeah.
We had all these plans to go to a bunch of wineries, but we ended up just going to one, and it was everything we needed in a bunch of wineries. It was just that moment of connecting with her. We know her story. Talk about a bunch of pastors, like just Aaron, Robyn, and I got the whole story out of this woman about how her kid, like, it was incredible.
And so like that is a, like, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful experience, right? Like we were there, we were connecting, we were drinking really good wine. And then later we went to that really cool speakeasy, right? So when I think about space, and I in my PhD work, I read about a lot about space and place, like theories about space and place. So space and place is like ritualistic for me. And so I love going to live music with Anna. Most of the time, she will capture shimmies, which are all over her Instagram page.
True story.
And I've seen these,
like,
baby.
And like, I love that. But I'm a hermit, and I don't last long because I'm a 5 on the Enneagram and an intense introvert.
Yeah. Robyn's favorite thing to do in going to live music is the going home part. and I hear the music end, and literally like I like just melt into a crushing ball of sadness onto the floor, because all of these people are going to disappear, and I'm going to disappear, and I'm never going to have that experience again. So,
you know, we are
strange bedfellows, friends.
We are,
strange
but
bedfellows.
what people don't know is I initially went to college in Texas on a music scholarship. So actually, music is one of my first loves. I just happened to fall in love with philosophy and ideas and became a thinker. So, you know, music is, I would say a love language, because I'm really food and sex motivated. So food is more my love language, but music, to be with people, again, it's about ritual. Right. To be with people, to feel the energy of people, to feel the rhythm, is really powerful and I would say sacred.
Yeah,
I love them.
It's this idea of are we taking in other people's energy? So almost like that empath thing, which can be both positive and negative, right? So you're in a large space. So for me, recognizing that like my central nervous system has been overworked for the last however many years, because it's almost like I've been taking in people. Anna, you said you take in that energy from people, but I also can take in that negative, like vibe space. Yes. And so I think as a Enneagram 5, you're like thinking through all these things. And
strategizing how the hell to get out. Right.
You're like, right. And so that takes up the moment where it's hard to be present to it. But then those moments where you watch Anna, and you, as someone who really cares about Anna, you can feel that like, oh, but there's something about this space. If Anna is so, captivated by this space, there's something about it. And then you can like almost like separate yourself from how you're experiencing it and see someone else experiencing it and going, oh, okay.
There's nothing better than being in live music space with Anna with a bourbon or a beer, and I can just sip on my drink. We've got like 2 months before we're doing that, friends. It's gonna be great. Right. I could just sip on my drink, and I can enjoy this space. And the thing is because I'm so introverted, and because I live in my mind all the time, I don't always feel safe where I am. I'm also trans and queer and all that. So like safety is a thing for me. I've got to feel safe. Right. So like I really like watching concerts from my couch. I watched the Brandy Carlisle concert from the Ryman from my couch, and I really enjoyed that. But there is something particular about being in life space, like beer and hymns, for example. Something happens in that space. And I loved when Anna and I will probably never get to do it again because the world is changing. But when we went on the Melissa Etheridge cruise together, I loved it. People probably thought that we were like Mutt and Jeff and what were we doing there? But I loved it. I loved being there. I loved listening to the music. I love checking out at 9 o'clock, and Anna would go to the casino and hang out with the musicians. And I would get up and like I would have breakfast with the parents of the band members and the writers, not the performers. And I really loved that. And Anna and I, we're so different, but that difference has brought us together in a really beautiful way. And I think together we create a really compelling space of connection that I think is unparalleled by other people.
I love that.
Speaking of which, speaking of the space that you all make, tell us about Activist Theology Project. Tell the people all about it.
Okay, you go, Anna. I've been talking.
Well, so there's two iterations of activist theology. The Activist Theology Project is a project that Dr. Robyns started 3 years ago. We just celebrated our 3-year anniversary or birthday, however you would like to name it. And it is a collaborative team that really kind of works to harness the ethics and politics of what we call en conjunto, which is togetherness. And so we are this kind of misfit group of public theologians and justice advocates who really intentionally situate ourselves in this hybrid space of church and social change and the academy. And as a spinoff of the project, Dr. Robyn and I created the Activist Theology Podcast, which is a weekly podcast that explores the conversations that then kind of create situations for social change. And so this podcast space is really fueled by a blend of analysis and activism. So it's an encouraging way for our listeners to learn about the ways they can get their hands dirty in the work, but to also understand the ethics and the analysis behind that action, so that we aren't just doing work for work's sake, but we're actually doing work with the intention of achieving what we believe is possible in social liberation.
I love the title. I think it says a lot, almost even about the spaces that we're talking about, this idea that it's not just getting in our head, right? So the theology part is the thought of, right? Theology can be an incredible hands-off moment, right? Robyn talked a little bit about it before, right? We can get into the thoughts. We can get into that thinking part of us. We can get into the weeds of philosophy, right? But activist theology doesn't allow for that. It's an engagement. It's I have to be acting on the thoughts that I'm having. And I think it's this beautiful merge of the Bible says faith without works is dead. But you know what I mean? There is this thing that happens that's a separation that I think it's real. And I think there's so many ways that you guys are tapping into that reality that people kind of can get in one camp or the other. And the truth is that we got to meet somewhere with both. And so I think even your name was a great idea to make activist theology. Like, it's not just about contemplation and setting the world over there and thinking about it. It's also engaging it. So it creates a different sort of space.
And I would say theology, if you really want to get granular,
which I do. Keep going.
All theology is ethics.
Yes.
All theology is active. We have relied on doctrine and dogma and thought, but ideas are actually movement.
Yes.
And we have, in the West at least, we have sold our soul to disembodied thought, disconnected from the body, disconnected from action, disconnected from pressing social concerns. So if we really want to get into the nitty gritty of it, activist theology is just reclaiming that faith, that faith that is living, that is moving, that is always becoming.
Right. It's interesting. They're so much leaned into right belief for so long. So do you ascribe to these three things, these four things, these, and it's almost an out, right? Okay, well, I believe those things, so I'm good and I'm done, and I
Right.
don't have to engage it anymore.
Right.
And you're right. Theology in the true sense of it. So theology just being the thought of God or the thoughts on the divine or however you want to put it. It should demand action, because what ideas become things.
Right.
And momentarily, it's not like idea then takes a while and then becomes a thing. Like your way of thinking about how I feel about people, how I think about people, how I think about the humanity of people is going to drive my action to then how I participate in the world with them. So
yeah, and thought is derived from imagination. So I'll just use a phrase, our anthropological imagination, right? What we think about humanity. When I say human, what conjures up in your mind? Probably a white body.
mm,
In our anthropological imagination, if we are not grounded in a really robust imagination, then we reduce the world to being white bodied and therefore complicit in supremacy culture. And so the Activist Theology Project tries to expand our imagination through story and analysis, tries to invite people into the world to get their hands dirty. And Anna is a practical theologian. I am not a practical theologian. And so this pair of like theory and practice, or theology and praxis, is a great sweet spot to invite people into another possible world.
I think that work is really important, especially considering the church at large, right? And we can talk about America, but it's not even just, it's American influenced churches as well. Like in
Right.
my family, we got preachers on preachers in my family,
Right.
but they're the least generous people I know.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't use that practice. They don't look at the scriptures and say, well, we're called to be generous people.
Mm-hmm.
They're only concerned with you being correct.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to heaven because I like gay people. So, but they are, even though that they do nothing to help support the kingdom of God.
Right.
Because that comes later, not now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, let's just go with the Sermon on the Mount. The first shall be last, the last shall be first.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we've allowed ourselves to, especially when I say we, in this context, I mean we, those of us who are church going or faith centric, humans, we've allowed ourselves to silo our beliefs in a way that kind of almost create a salad bar of faith. And we can say, you know what, I want to choose this style of base. I'm a spinach eater, not an iceberg eater. And I don't like carrots and I don't like tomatoes, but I want a ton of cheese. And I mean, all these things, we've allowed ourselves to kind of compartmentalize what action and thought and theory kind of create for us in faith. And what that's done is it's not just set us up for the kind of denominational trial that we are in now across the board with all of our ideologies competing for airtime, but it also has made us as individuals really lackadaisical in understanding how it is we really are to be people of the creator we have been called to serve, because we go to the salad bar and we get the same freaking salad every time. We never change it up. We never decide that we want to eat something different on any given day, because this dogma and this kind of comfort has allowed us to, sink into our seat and say, well, like this is my work to do, and I'm going to just do this work. Liberation will not come from us being those kinds of of faith followers. Regardless of what your faith tradition is, we will not be free from our chains if we are eating the same thing every day.
Yeah.
See, this is why I work with Anna. This right here. This is why I work with Anna.
It makes sense.
Oftentimes I feel like people are scared of that liberation, right? Because you'd have to come out of this shell. Like, I get in a lot of trouble. Well, trouble, I don't really care. But I get a lot of pushback because I care about a lot of things. And I think about a lot of things deeply. Like, I won't eat Chick-fil-A because they are contributing to the oppression of the LGBTQIA plus community. And people don't like that. People say, like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Or I am pushing people not going to Hawaii right now because that's what the native people said. And people get all upset about it because they want to go to Hawaii. And they're not wanting to see that your small actions can fulfill the liberation for us all. You making a teeny little sacrifice of not eating a Chick-fil-A sandwich and not going to Hawaii can mean like monumental change for other people. But because it's making you uncomfortable, you don't want to have to make the shift. And that is a huge problem in the church in general, at least in my little Latin opinion.
A little Latin. No one has ever accused you of having a little Latin opinion.
Yeah,
That's
and
why I work with her.
if I can just speak to Latin opinions, we need more of those.
Yes.
We need more Latin opinions, in my opinion. IMHO.
In my I had to think about what that meant. What I am really fascinated by is that Robyn, you like to not think of yourself as like a hip person, but how many times have you taught me what like a hip saying is? I'm like, what does that mean? And then you define it for me because I don't know, in my opinion. I think it's hard too. I think there's fatigue, if we're honest. Josie, I think what you're tapping into is people might be pushing back because there is so much to care about, isn't there? I was listening today to a podcaster who was talking about how people are like, wait a minute, like we have a new president. Why are you still having a show about the way that politics fails people? And he was saying because it hasn't stopped failing people. It doesn't kind of actually matter. It matters. It matters. When I say it doesn't matter who's in the White House, I don't mean it doesn't matter who's in the White House. But his point was the work continues. Does it matter?
Also, if you think Joe Biden is the answer or the Messiah,
we got some news.
Yeah. Let me break it to you. Joe Biden is not the answer. I mean, it's always the better of two evils. And a prominent pastor came after me on Twitter, a white man. I'll say his name. A white man, a YT. I'll say his name. John Pavlovitz came after me for calling it the better of two evils. And John was like, Joe's not evil. And I'm like, let's go back through policies. This man may be empathetic, but this man is a white-bodied capitalist exploiting and extracting, making millions of dollars. He out of Trump and Biden, he was the better of both of those evils. And but you know, white people, these white liberal progressives, see, people get all pissy with me when I say I'm not a liberal progressive. I'm not invested in that paradigm. I'm invested in the logic of liberation. And the logic of liberation is about being curious about another possible world. And if you're going to vote Democratic or vote blue, and Anna and I, we talk about this on our podcast. We talk about electoral politics. This is the same coin, the Democrat and Republic. It's the same coin. There are only a few things separating the Democrats and Republicans right now.
Yeah, I mean, we have to. It wouldn't have mattered whether it was Biden or Bernie or Elizabeth Warren or the most radical, liberation-centric Democrat that you can think of. They are still ruling this country on the backs of Black and brown people. We are still stuck in systems of oppression that no politician will ever rid us of, regardless of their policies and their politics. Those systems are the systems that have to change. That's what has to change before it will ever matter who sits behind the desk.
Yep.
It doesn't matter how liberal that person is. We are a country that is built on the backs of people whose oppression and continued oppression is the single thing that continues to let white folks thrive.
Right.
And until we are all willing to break that system down and decide that politics has no place in liberation, and that we have to rid ourselves of a political ideology in order to get there, it doesn't matter who we elect. I mean, yes,
Right.
there will be people's lives who will become easier, or whose lives will become harder based on polity.
Yeah, I think
that is a true statement.
Yeah.
And yet,
but white people don't want to divest. This is why, Josie, going back to your telling people not to go to Hawaii, white people don't want to divest from their vacation places. And right now, what people need to be doing is fucking divesting.
It's like gentrification I only know of Los Angeles, so I can say that. People want to move to where it's cheap, and they want to make all these excuses, and they want to make it all pretty for themselves. They don't want to accept the responsibility of what they're doing to brown bodies.
Right.
Brown bodies that built the city in the first place,
Right.
whose land was stolen from them in the first place.
Right.
And like we were talking about in politics, my dad, who only was able to vote during the Hillary campaign, that was his first election, because we spent decades in immigration court because America sucks. He always says, like, they are never going to want us here, but they're never going to get rid of us. They need us. The economy will collapse without black and brown bodies. So they can cry white supremacy all day long, but they're never going to get rid of us. They cannot. Right. They cannot exist without us.
It's a whole, like, the black and brown class of workers upholds our economic system. I write about this in my next book. And then we criminalize immigration. We criminalize people who are border crossers.
Yeah, there's that. It's an interesting moment too. I think people are tired. Some of our strongest, fiercest leaders, and it's a hard thing, right, to like engage this work. I think about this idea of Hawaii, whatever it might be. It's like a dear friend of mine said the other day, there's a new cause every day that I need to care about, and I'm tired. And so, Josie, to your point a little bit, I think sometimes you do have to stick in the lane of like, what's my work to do? Right. And how can I support people who are doing work in those other places? But what is my work to do? Because if I do spaghetti myself all over the place, which is a really easy thing to do, like, what is the latest thing I heard? Now that's my cause, right? Versus going, what is the deep inner work that I have been called to? And then how can I be part of supporting those who are, in those other places? And I think that's been kind of a cool thing about what I feel like your podcast does, is it like gives people like here's a touch of this one. Did that stir the thing in you? Okay, then you run with that, and then you don't harm the other places and you support where you can. Because I think we're dealing with, in a massive way that we've never dealt with before, community and culture who are exhausted. Pastors who are progressive pastors, and Anna, you and I could probably talk about this for a long time. So many of the pastors that were doing this work were exhausted. And we are in this fatigue moment, but it's you can't be fatigued, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, the work doesn't stop just because you're tired. And so I would really love to hear from all three of you, like, how does one make space for the thing that they're called to make space for, and then kind of get up? Sometimes making a space for me is getting out of the way, like actually most of the time. So I would love to hear what you guys think about this idea of like fatigue, or this idea of capturing the thing that is your thing so that you can get deeply rooted in it, versus I have a lot of friends who are, I'll be honest, they're wonderful people, but they are virtue signaling, and I do it too, right? Well, right. I can repost this, and then I've touched that thing. And then I had to shrink away from stuff because I knew I wasn't constantly hitting the mark. And like, what if I was canceled by all 1,700 people, right? Like, everyone has an opinion about how I do my work. And that's a very particular thing that has burnt me out. And so I would love to hear this. Just sort of where you guys feel. How do you invest well, I guess?
I think for me, in the age of social media, I don't necessarily see any harm in maybe not taking up the mantle for every cause, but calling attention to every cause when you can. Reposting can seem like virtue signaling, but sometimes it's just educating.
And magnifying, maybe. Magnifying is not the word.
Amplifying.
Thank you. Yeah.
And honestly, when people tell me that they're exhausted, I think, well, how the hell do you think the rest of us feel all the time, every day in our everyday lives?
But that doesn't like negate it. Like,
no, not at all.
Because it's not healthy that you're exhausted, and it's not healthy that other people are exhausted. So how do we, because that's I think, Robyn, you actually said this to me, that's part of the economy we live in creates exhaustion. Yeah.
Right.
But I would challenge people to sit in their exhaustion and why they feel exhausted. Do they feel exhausted because they're doing too much and feeling too much? Or are they just tired of taking up the torch and they just want to put it down because they just don't want to anymore?
Right.
That's what I find, at least with my white friends, is they're like, ugh, I've already posted about that. I'm done with that. I'm like, whatever, George Floyd's murderer is in jail, whatever, it's fine. It's like, well, that's not the whole issue. We need to keep it going. And I get that you're exhausted, but how do you think the Black people feel? And I mean, that's very much an Enneagram 8 thing of me, probably. Although I'm getting really fucking tired of people calling me an Enneagram 8. The Enneagram
Which is a very Enneagram 8 thing to do. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But, and maybe it's, yeah, I try to be kind when kindness is due, but also sometimes it's just a little bit like the rest of us are much more exhausted. Keep it going a little bit longer.
That's one of those things that I have to be honest with. Like, you don't get to judge that for other people.
Right.
Yeah. Like you saying, oh, we're all, I mean, unfortunately, it's one of those things that someone's exhaustion, it doesn't matter. It's like someone's grief. You can't say that grief is more important than that grief. It just is. And so people will tune you out, right? So we don't want people to tune us out because we've got all these things.
People play these oppression Olympics all the fucking time.
Right.
Yeah. You know,
I stole that either from you or Kevin, the oppression Olympics. I've used that a couple of times. Yeah.
And you know what Josie says about exhaustion, you know, I don't think that my exhaustion or Josie's exhaustion is the same as yours and Anna's.
Right. It's different.
We might be very tired, but the fact that I have to think about my safety every fucking time I leave my house is a different kind of exhaustion that white-bodied folks, cisgendered presenting folks don't have to struggle with.
Because it's a base level.
Right.
It's a compounding.
Yeah, so people wonder why I have to take a fucking siesta every day. Well, it's because I'm fucking worried about every time I leave my house, I'm gonna get attacked or jumped or something, you know?
But also because you have really good boundaries. One of my favorite, like, I feel like you inspire me when you're like, I'm gonna take a nap now. I'm like, we can do that. like I feel like it's so inspiring. Or you're like, I'm leaving this meeting because it's late. I'm like, I'm not mad that they're doing that, which means we can do that.
Yeah. And I think it's not so much about comparing each other's exhaustion. It's just challenging people, especially white-bodied people, to think about their exhaustion, to think about why they're exhausted.
Through it. That's great.
And to think about, can you keep going for the rest of us? Can you just a little bit more? Just a little bit.
And I think for me, one of the things that I have found from a kind of resiliency standpoint or a mitigating exhaustion standpoint. Now, I mean, truth, you know, full truth. I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, and so that
means that she farts rainbows.
Yeah, more or less. But I also, I mean, I rarely allow myself to feel exhausted because there's always something new and better and different and next for me. That's a chronic kind of state that I find myself in. And that state is not exhausting for me. So it's not detrimental, you know, to my day to day. But I think as I've gotten older, and I'm the oldest on this episode of this podcast.
Are you really?
So
You're not older than me.
I am. I just turned 48.
I need your skincare
that
regimen.
skin
We can have that
girl.
on a different podcast.
Okay. But yeah, I think as I've gotten older, the thing that I have realized is that oftentimes those of us who are activists and those of us who are pastors and those of us who have an empathetic bend for the world, we think and we do too big. We think about worldwide issues and national issues because oftentimes our platform is a national platform or a larger platform than what others have. We need our energy so much more at a local level than we do at a national level or at an international level. And that's not to say that causes and conversations and retweets and the impact of the work we shouldn't attempt to try to expand it into bigger and more impactful ways. But I got to tell you, the number of people who vote in local elections is pitiful. When it really is your day to day and the way that your city council and your mayor and your school board run the community in which you live. It really is about the way that your police chief acts towards the people that live in your block. It really is about the way that the teachers in the school system in the county that you live in teach the children about critical race theory or negate it in a way that makes it seem as if it is a harmful tactic for a historical perspective. And so I think that for me, my capacity to limit my fatigue has required of me to turn my gaze to Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Okay.
I focus on my district. I focus on my town. That's not to say that I won't. I travel to Nashville and I do work on behalf of the state, and I try to be a voice for trans and queer folk in the state of Tennessee. I'll go to a women's march. I'll go to a national gathering of humans to try to let my voice be raised. But in the grand scheme of things, if I am not making a difference in the place that I live, then the people that are a part of my immediate community are the people that are suffering the most. And I have to be as conscientious about my care for my amazing Black neighbor, Ralph, that lives across the street from me, as I am for, Black folk who are being hindered and harmed, and brown folk who are being hindered and harmed in all other cities across the country. And so for me, that is the tactic that's worked for me. And it has really made a difference in my capacity to keep going because I've shrunk my gaze and I've focused a little more on the things that I feel like I can influence versus the things that I feel like I just need to talk about.
And I feel like
it goes back to space and place.
Yes. That's what we talked. I was just going to say, I feel, I remember I was captivated a lot by Wendell Berry's work. And I think it's because Wendell Berry does this great job of saying exactly what all three of you have said, being very specific about where you are and being captivated by your actual neighbor. Because until something has a face, then it is all theory. And it's really easy to just think, okay, well, this is that. And I'm excited for the work that you guys do because it is giving a face for folks, and it might be a larger, it might be not anyone that's anywhere close to them, but now they're going to know how to encounter their transgendered neighbor because they've at least had a moment that wasn't they've had a touch of it to know how to now engage it in a different way. And so it's doing this larger work so that we can do the real work, which is the interpersonal. It's the down, it's the close.
It's all about relationships. It's relationships all the way down for me.
Yes.
And if I am not concerned, like one of my passions are the people who live without walls. And That could be any of us on this podcast.
Yep.
And if I do not care for my friends on the streets, no,
Mhm.
it's fucking 2021. No one should be without a home.
No.
Amen.
No.
Yep.
No.
And
Friends.
so if I don't care about that,
yeah, that's your literal neighbor. That
Yeah.
is where are they? Where are they staying? How
Right.
are they being cared for?
Right.
We could talk forever, and this is why I'm so glad we're all part of Irreverent Media group, because we're just going to do this, guys. We're going to talk forever, but also we're going to act, right? Activist theology. We're not just going to talk. Would either of you or both of you or together, I don't know, one of you starts the sentence, the other ends it, whatever, however you guys want to do this. What is a tangible way for our listeners or anyone who is hearing this, or for them to make space for themselves or others? I think we've offered a couple of things, like getting very local, but what is one thing that you would offer to people as sort of a tangible way to move forward in this? Big question, I know.
Yeah, I think that for me, it is kind of understanding how the space that you occupy influences the space that others occupy. I mean, we are ultimately a part of a massive Venn diagram, right? And it's impossible for something that I do to not have a trickle effect, or to intersect with someone else in some way at some time. Now, that might be my intersection with my partner that I live with, and then his intersection with someone else outside the walls. Or it may be my intersection with someone on the street, and then their intersection with their pastor down the line. But every one of us has the need to identify that our space is interconnected and is interwoven with another's. And ultimately, our space is then also interwoven with all of us. And so if we are going to be people who identify space and place as something that is intimate and important to us, then we have to recognize that all action and all ethics are ultimately going to touch another in one way or possibility. And that's what I try to stay mindful of.
I love that.
I ask people where they buy their coffee. Do you go to Starbucks every day? Or are you buying from a local place that sources their coffee and pays people equitably? When I was
baby.
Yeah, when I was teaching in Berkeley before I left my faculty post, I found a coffee shop with a sustainable business model that is a cooperative, and they pay their farmers. The farmers it's farmer owned, so the farmers have a say. And so every month we get coffee from this coffee CSA. Where do you buy your groceries? Are you buying everything at Whole Foods, which actually is invested in private prisons? Or are you buying from local farms?
So just think about, and maybe just taking one of them, right? Because it's hard to think about every one of those things at once. Like, I'm always aware of, like, it can shut people down to, like, think about all those things. So, like, what's the thing? Like, today is the question, where are you getting your coffee? And then that leads you to ask, right? We always talk as friends about intersectionality, right? So, like, if you start to think about this, then you're going to think about this, but you can't kind of throw the thing. You got to start with the one thing. So, Robyn, that's so helpful. Anna, so helpful.
Nice.
Thank you to both of you. Where can folks find both of your work together and then your work separately?
So our work for the Activist Theology Project and podcast is at Activist Theology, and Activist and Theology share a T. So you can find us on any of our website, any social media channels at Activist Theology. I can be personally found at Unholy Heretic, and hair is spelled Hair because of my magnificent blonde coif. So Unholy Heretic is where folks can locate me on social media.
And I'm at iRobyn, that's the letter I, ROBYN. And I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm on all those things.
Well, I am so grateful to both of you. I'm excited for us to get to know each other more and more and more. Your work is so inspiring to myself and to Josie as well. And so, Josie, where can folks find us?
You can find us at makingspacespodcast.com or at makingspacesPodcast on Instagram.
And you can find me at Rev Sarah Keith, and you can find Josie at Josie Takes the World.
Yes.
The entire world. Josie
I want to be
takes-
in that world.
It's a good world. Friends, thank you so much for joining us. We, as a podcast, are taking a break. So normally we would say, we'll see you next week. We'll be saving a space for you, but we will see you when we see you, where we will always be.
Saving a space for you.
Bye.